Hello and welcome. Before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more intriguing stories that will help you fall asleep. Tonight, you're invited to gently set sail through time, across quiet seas, beneath star-speckled skies, and into the creaking, weather-worn world of the Age of Exploration. But this won't be a tale of glory or conquests. Not exactly. Instead, you will hear the forgotten rhythm of daily life aboard the wooden ships that carried men across oceans. You'll drift through their routines, their quiet discomforts, and their moments of stillness. This is not a story of captains and kings, but of the men below deck. Those whose names were never recorded, sailors who slept in cramped hammocks, ate salted meat day after day, and stared out over endless water, not knowing if they'd ever see land again. We'll begin with their world, the rough wood, the ropes, the sky. Then we'll follow one of history's most fateful voyages, the circumnavigation led by Magellan, whose dream outlived his body. From there, we'll slip into the myths that haunted the maps of the time, whispers of monsters and unknown lands. And finally, we'll leave the waves behind and peer into the quiet opulence of the Spanish court, where gold goblets clinked and powdered courtiers spoke in hushed tones of discoveries they'd never witness. So, breathe slowly, let the sound of the waves carry you, and imagine yourself aboard a creaking ship somewhere between history and sleep. Rotting teeth, boredom, and flogging at sea. Imagine yourself waking, not to birdsong or sunshine, but to the muffled creak of timbers shifting overhead and the faint splash of water against the hull. You're lying in a canvas hammock, strung tightly between wooden beams. It sways slightly with the ship's movement. A restless cradle. There's no pillow, just the rough cloth under your head, damp from the breath of the man who slept here last night. Your body is sore. You haven't fully stretched in weeks, and your legs have grown used to the slight, constant instability beneath them. Above, it is still dark. Perhaps it's the early watch, just before dawn. You pull on your shirt, stiff with salt, and step carefully over sleeping bodies, each one breathing slowly, tangled in their own discomfort. When you emerge onto the deck, the air is cool and sharp, the sky is pale, not yet ready to lighten. All around you, the sea stretches in every direction, gray, slow-moving, and vast. There is no land. There hasn't been for days or weeks. You've stopped counting. You are a sailor aboard a 16th century vessel, one of dozens, perhaps pressed into service, perhaps desperate for coin, perhaps chasing something. Though you're no longer sure what it was, your work is constant. The sails need adjusting, ropes need coiling, and the deck must be scrubbed. Always, even if you just scrubbed it yesterday, especially if it rained. Order must be maintained, because the sea, by its nature, is not orderly. Your hands are thick with calluses, your nails dark with grime. You wear the same clothes every day. Coarse wool, often damp, always itchy. There are no changes of linen, no soap for proper washing. Fresh water is rationed, far too precious to waste on washing when it's needed for drinking. And even then, it tastes of stale barrels and algae. You eat twice a day, if you're lucky. The meals are simple and nearly always the same. Salted beef or pork, So heavily cured it must be soaked to make it chewable. Hard biscuit, known as ship's bread, riddled with weevils you pretend not to see, and sometimes dried peas or a ladle of thin broth. The biscuit is so hard it can break teeth. Many men already have. You eat in silence, mostly not out of decorum, but out of fatigue. Conversation is saved for when the work is done, and even then, it's slow and simple. Talk of home, of port, of food that isn't gray or sour. Your teeth ache. Many men complain of their gums, red, swollen, prone to bleeding. Scurvy. It's a quiet, creeping sickness. There are no lemons, no oranges, no green vegetables, just time and the slow unraveling of the body. Still, the ship moves on, day after day. The wind determines the pace. Sometimes you drift for hours with barely a whisper in the sails. Other times, the ship groans under the force of a storm, and you are sent to haul ropes in rain that stings your skin and blinds your eyes. You hold tight, because if you fall, you will not be rescued. The sea is indifferent. There are punishments, too, for sleeping on duty, for stealing food, for speaking out of turn. Flogging is common, swift, public, and unquestioned. The lash strikes skin not to draw blood, but to instill obedience. And then the work resumes. Always the work resumes. At night, the sea can be beautiful. Stars stretch across the sky in thick ribbons. The ship creaks and groans. Like a living thing, you lie in your hammock and listen to the wood around you, to the distant snore of a shipmate, to the waves tapping the hull gently again and again. And in that moment you are still, not comfortable, not content, but still. This was the life of countless men who crossed the oceans, not for glory, but because they had no other choice. And now, as we drift further into this world, let us follow one of the most ambitious and ultimately tragic journeys ever attempted by sea. Circumnavigation, mutiny, and a grave far from home. Imagine the world as a vast unknown, not a globe as we understand it today, but an enormous patchwork of myths, rumors, and voids. Oceans that stretched endlessly, lands marked only by hearsay, and somewhere beyond it all, a shortcut, a hidden route westward to the riches of the East. This was the world into which Ferdinand Magellan set sail in 1519. His name would become famous, his voyage legendary. But for Magellan himself, the journey would not end in glory. It would end, instead, in a shallow grave on an unfamiliar beach, under a sky not his own. Let's begin at the very start. Ferdinand Magellan was born in northern Portugal, sometime in the late 1480s, raised in nobility. He entered royal service at a young age, and later found himself in the Portuguese fleet, sailing to India and beyond. But despite years of loyalty, he fell out of favor. His requests for support were denied, his ambitions dismissed. So he did something few dared to do. He left Portugal and pledged his services to its rival, Spain. Imagine the quiet tension of such a betrayal. Walking foreign halls, speaking in soft Castilian, promising Spanish glory to Spanish kings, all while carrying a Portuguese heart. With Spanish backing, Magellan was granted 5 ships. Their names were Trinidad, San Antonio, Victoria, and Santiago. Around 270 men set sail, their minds filled with possibilities, riches, fame, a new western route to the Spice Islands, but the sea, as always, had other plans. Within weeks, the ships were battered by storms. The food began to spoil. Men argued. Commanders whispered discontent. By the time they reached the coast of South America, tension simmered just beneath the deck. The coastline was unfamiliar and unforgiving. Cold winds battered the sails, and inland nothing but silence and stone. They wintered near what is now Argentina. And there, in the bleak quiet of the southern chill, the mutiny began. 3 of the 5 captains turned against Magellan. They saw his foreign birth as a weakness, his authority as fragile. They attempted to take command, but Magellan, ever calculating, acted swiftly. The mutiny was crushed with chilling efficiency. 1 captain was executed, another marooned, a 3rd pardoned, but under close watch. Still, Magellan pressed onward, further south, past forests, past icy cliffs, until, finally, he found the narrow channel that would one day bear his name. The Strait of Magellan, winds howled through its jagged coasts. The water was treacherous, the path narrow and twisting. One of the ships, Santiago, was lost to the rocks. Another, San Antonio, deserted, quietly turning back to Spain, leaving no message, no farewell. Now only 3 ships remained. Emerging into the vast Pacific, they expected a short crossing, a matter of weeks. Instead, it took 3 months. 3 months without fresh food, without landfall, without certainty. Men starved. Some chewed leather from the rigging, others drank seawater, despite knowing the cost. Scurvy spread among the crew like a silent tide. The smell of rot lingered beneath every breath. Still, the ocean stretched on, impossibly blue, impossibly vast. When they finally reached the Philippines, they were no longer explorers, they were survivors. It was here, among the islands, that Magellan made a fatal decision. He sought to convert local chiefs to Christianity, and in doing so, involved himself in a local conflict. On the island of Mactan, he led a small force against a local ruler named but Magellan misjudged the battle. He underestimated the resistance. The sea could not save him this time. He was struck down, not in grand battle, but on a quiet beach, far from the maps he once studied, far from the empire he swore to serve. He never finished his journey. It was the ship Victoria, under the quiet command of Juan Elcano, that would complete the circumnavigation. A ghost ship limping back into Seville with only 18 survivors aboard. And so, the story ends where it began, with a dream of discovery, paid for in hunger, fear, and lives forgotten. As you drift in this slow tale of ambition and loss, let the waves quiet, let the sails fall still. And now, let us turn our attention to the maps that shaped these voyages, the mysterious charts, filled with creatures, coastlines, and speculation. Hidden charts, sea monsters, and speculative coastlines. Before a voyage could begin, Before a single sail was raised or a rope was tied, a navigator would unroll a map. Not a modern map with neat lines and precise latitudes, but something altogether stranger. Older, more dreamlike. The maps of the age of exploration were part science, part hearsay, and part wishful thinking. They were drawn with ink on parchment or vellum, hand-painted with delicate colors, and often tinged with fear. Imagine one of these maps before you now. The edges are uneven, browned with age. The land masses are oddly shaped, familiar but warped. Some coasts are exaggerated, some seas compressed. Here is Africa, longer than it should be. There is Asia, curled like a sleeping dragon. The Americas, barely hinted at or not yet present at all. And in the wide blank spaces where no sailor had yet returned from are words written in looping script. Terra incognita, unknown land, or sometimes hic sunt dracons. Here be dragons. These were not maps of certainty. They were maps of imagination, of rumor, of the gaps in what men thought they knew. Let us begin with the Portolan charts. Among the earliest and most accurate navigational tools of the medieval and early modern world, these maps were astonishing for their time. They charted coastlines with remarkable precision, especially around the Mediterranean and the coasts of Western Europe. They were dense with lines, crisscrossing rum lines, showing directions between ports. Each map centered around a compass rose, surrounded by radiating lines like a spider's web. But the interior lands, often empty or filled with art. The further from Europe the cartographers went, the more fanciful the details became. Strange creatures roamed the oceans, whales the size of islands, sea serpents with curling tails, giant fish with eyes like lanterns. Some of these were inspired by sailors' tales, others were copied from earlier maps, but many were simply decorative, flourishes of mystery added where knowledge ended. Then there were the secret maps, the prized possessions of crowns and trading companies. In Spain and Portugal especially, maps were state secrets. The routes to the Indies, the locations of profitable coasts, the depths of certain harbors, these were not shared freely. Navigational knowledge was power. To possess a chart of a coastline unknown to your rivals was to possess an advantage worth guarding or stealing. The Portuguese had their roteiros, or route books, passed quietly between trusted pilots. The Spanish crown maintained the pod or unreal, an official master map updated in secrecy by royal cartographers. Copies were strictly controlled. Even the famous Piri race map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, hints at this blend of secrecy and speculation. It shows parts of Europe, North Africa, and Brazil with surprising accuracy, and yet strangely, it also seems to depict a southern landmass resembling Antarctica, centuries before its discovery. Where did that information come from? Piri Reis himself claimed he used dozens of sources, some from the Portuguese, some ancient, and even, as he writes, a map drawn by Columbus. But Columbus's own maps, like so many of the era, are lost, and this is what defines the maps of the age of exploration: their silence. For all their illustrations and careful labels, They are documents of uncertainty. They show what was known and what was guessed, what was feared, what was hoped. They reflect a time when the world was not yet measured, when sailors followed stars instead of GPS, when the edges of the earth were still fuzzy and filled with the unknown. Imagine yourself tracing your fingers across such a map, imagining what lay beyond each curl of coastline, wondering if monsters truly waited in the deep. Now, as we fold the map and set it gently aside, let us shift to the courts of Europe, specifically the palace halls of Spain, where those maps were studied not by sailors, but by nobles in brocade, who sipped wine while others suffered at sea. Gold-plated arrogance, etiquette, and barely washed hands. Now, imagine yourself no longer aboard a ship, but standing quietly in the marble corridors of a grand palace. The stone beneath your feet is cold and smooth. The walls rise high around you, hung with richly woven tapestries. Sunlight filters through arched windows, catching on golden chandeliers and mirrors so fine they shimmer like water. You are in the court of 16th century Spain. Here the rhythm of life is not dictated by waves or winds, but by bells' protocol and whispered hierarchy. The court of King Charles V, later Charles I of Spain, was among the most powerful in Europe. It was a place of dazzling wealth, sharp etiquette, and carefully choreographed appearances. Each day began early, not with labor, but with ritual. Courtiers rose at the sound of servants' footsteps, slipping into embroidered robes and powdered collars. Bathing was infrequent. A damp cloth here, a scented oil there. Fragrance often stood in for hygiene. As the king began his morning, so too did the rituals around him. From the presentation of garments to the formal greetings in the Hall of Mirrors, everything followed a delicate script. Breakfast was light, often taken in private, a bit of bread, some fruit, perhaps wine or watered-down beer. But it was the feasts, the midday and evening meals, that revealed the full performance of courtly life. Imagine entering the great dining hall. A long wooden table stretches the length of the room, covered in white linen and laid with silver platters. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat, stewed fruits, and warm spices. Cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg brought at great cost from across the seas. Servants move quietly, refilling goblets and rearranging plates. Music drifts from a corner ensemble, lutes, viols, the occasional harp. No one speaks too loudly. Even laughter is measured. On your plate might be partridge in sauce, slices of cold ham, a custard tart, or a dish of sweet almonds. Utensils are rare. A knife, perhaps a spoon, but many still eat with fingers. Forks exist, but they are not yet common in Spain. Instead, fingers are used delicately with a small cloth always nearby. Washing basins are brought forward before and after the meal. Still, germs were little understood, and many hands were not as clean as they appeared. The king dines in full view, observed but rarely spoken to. His preferences shape the menu. If he dislikes garlic, it disappears from the kitchens. If he favors a certain wine, whole barrels are brought across the continent to ensure its presence. The food is rich and plentiful, yet it is also part of a performance. To dine well is to show power. Power over lands, over trade routes, over men. And while the nobles feast, far away, on ships bobbing in distant seas, sailors chew stale biscuit and dream of bread that isn't hard, of water that doesn't sour. In this courtly world, letters arrive from explorers and governors. Reports of storms, of new islands, of lost ships. They are read aloud by candlelight. The listeners nod, but rarely act. The distance between this room and the sea is not measured in miles, but in silence. The court enjoys the fruits of exploration, without hearing the creak of wood or the moans of the sick. Evening comes, and with it another ceremony, the king's departure. The nobles retreat to their chambers, lit by oil lamps and warmed by braziers. Servants bring heated stones to the foot of the bed. A small sweet may be left on the pillow, a sugared fig, a candied orange peel. Outside, the stars are the same as those seen from the deck of a ship. But here, the night is quiet, controlled. Imagine for a moment the life of someone within these walls, so far from the cries of gulls and the slap of ropes against mast, so far from the sea, and yet living from it. Let your thoughts linger in this stillness. Let the sounds of music, the clink of silverware, the hush of tapestries shifting in a gentle breeze, fade slowly from your mind, a gentle reflection and easing into sleep. And now the sails are furled. The maps are rolled away. The candles in the palace have flickered out. Across this long, quiet journey, we've traced the lives of sailors and kings, of maps and monsters, of hardship and luxury, all gently adrift in the soft rhythm of a world both distant and strangely familiar. We began in the dim belly of a wooden ship where sleep was fleeting and the days blurred with salt and toil. We felt the creaking of the hull, the dry crust of ship's biscuit, the weight of sky and sea pressing in from all sides. Then we followed Magellan, or at least the dream that bore his name, around the curve of the world, a voyage that began in firelight and ended in silence on a distant shore. We wandered through the speculative art of ancient maps, where dragons lived at the edges of the known, and chartmakers filled in what they could, leaving the rest to mystery. And finally, we stepped into marble corridors and gold-trimmed chambers, where feasts masked distance and courtly ceremonies stood in place of truth. Through it all, one thing remains constant: the passage of time, the way it softens edges, the way it blurs the difference between suffering and survival, between myth and memory. And now you lie still, surrounded not by ropes or cold stone, but by warmth and quiet. The past is far away. Its sounds now distant, hushed, like waves lapping gently on the hull of a ship long anchored. So rest now. Let the stories drift away. Let the sea be still. Let sleep come slowly, softly, like fog over water. Good night.